your inner conversation, your mental conversation, the chat that you have with yourself inside your head can be either supportive or not, can be encouraging, motivating, can reflect your sense of yourself, or indeed it could be the voice of somebody else, like a critic, a parent, maybe a coach who's overly critical. Your mental conversation matters. And this is day 14 of 30 days of mental skills. And the message here today is that everybody you know, you and everybody else, has a mental conversation, an inner conversation going on inside the dome of their skull. And oftentimes, I would say the vast majority of people have no control over this inner conversation. In fact, I would even go so far as to say most people don't even realize that it goes on. They identify with the voice in their head. And it's interesting to consider what this is, right? Okay, you might, put someone on in a brain scanner and identify certain regions of the brain associated with this inner conversation, and that's fine and right, proper, and so forth. But language, the audio that we hear as we sit quiet and think what's, about tomorrow or about yesterday or what you're going to do next, this conversation goes on. So we refer to it as going on in the mind rather than in the brain, right? Because we won't find it. In much the same way as you won't find the images in your mind, in your brain, rather. They're often substituted one for the other, mind and brain, but they're not the same. So we have this concept of a place. Let's say even that's the wrong word, but maybe a compartment or a realm where this conversation goes on, where the images appear when we imagine a future. We'll talk more about imagination and mental imagery and using it to structure your life and to build motivation around your goals and so forth in the next few days. But today we're talking about inner conversation. We don't know where it lies, but it exists. You experience it, I experience it. And the degree to which you can gain some control over this inner conversation, you will see that reflected in your life experience. Now, I'm not suggesting, I'm not going to go woo-woo on you and suggest that you can create a future for yourself by merely thinking about it. But what I will say is your thoughts about yourself, about the world, about other people influences what you'll do next. It provides you with a reference point for your behavior, right? I think that's fair to say. So, for example, if you are naturally, right, inverted commas, negatively oriented or pessimistic, you will likely use your past negative experience as reference points for the future. And so all you do, all the things that you engage in, all the things that you avoid will be based upon your previous life experiences. And if the ones that stand out in a negative sense, so to speak. And some of us are prone to be more pessimistic than others. If you're a highly optimistic person, you see that tomorrow there's an opportunity for tomorrow to be better than today or better than yesterday. That's a good thing. However, you must still be anchored in the present a little bit. So you'll find that where you lie on this optimist, pessimist continuum will be reflected in the nature of your inner conversation. So consider an athlete who regards themselves as reasonably good, but maybe not good enough. Maybe thinks to themselves on a regular basis, I shouldn't really be here. I don't know. I feel like a bit of an outsider. I don't belong here. I'm going to mess up. It's only a matter of time before they find me out. Now, if that's the nature of the ongoing conversation, it will have a direct negative impact on their performance. They might get through training on a week-to-week basis relatively well, but when it comes to a game, the intensity of the game, the high stakes nature of the game, may have a negative impact on their ability to perform. How that athlete talks to themselves on a day-to-day basis in the run-up to the game and so on matters. But the message is that can be reversed. In contrast, consider the young fella or the young one who's just left school, or maybe they've finished training as an apprentice, and they have an idea, I'm going to go working for myself. They don't know where the idea came from. They just have this kind of, you know what, this would be cool, to command my own work, to set my own hours, to charge a fee for my time that I choose, that somebody else doesn't choose. And you know what, I'm going to give this a lash. This feels like a good idea, right? So they have a significant degree of self-efficacy around themselves and this work and working for themselves. They might not have the answers. They might not have all the answers. In fact, they know that they don't, but they're willing to go and get stuck in and figure it out, right? Very, very optimistic, very growth-oriented mindset with this individual. And so the nature of their conversation might be a good one. They might support themselves when it doesn't work out, for example. If the business is not necessarily there, they feel enthusiastic to go out and find some. So these two examples are not just plucked out of the sky, I should add, because they relate to my own particular experience in sport and in work. Same person, different environment, slightly different self concept, right? One aspect of my self concept at that time as a 19-year-old or 20-year-old young fella having finished training and going out into the world was, this is great, I'm full of beans for this, let's go. And there was the prospect of failure, but it didn't matter. Parents would have said, don't do this, it's very risky, blah, blah, blah. It didn't come into the equation for me at the time. I decided to go for it, and I did. Now, circumstances changed down the road, but initially that's where it was. But at the same time in sport, maybe I wasn't so confident in my ability. Maybe I felt I didn't belong. And the conversation with myself around that was, you're not really good enough to be here. You're a bit of a blagger. You're going to be found out, right? And so that was arguably reflected in how that sporting career went. So the point is, how you talk to yourself matters. Now, it's not to suggest that lying to yourself will work, because it usually won't. Because if your belief is, I'm not really good enough, it doesn't matter how much positive reinforcement you give yourself, it's unlikely to change the situation. I like to think about our beliefs about ourselves in the world and what we can achieve on one hand, and our mental conversation on the other, as being self-reinforcing, as reciprocal, right? So one informs the other. It's not linear, it's cyclical. And so who knows what starts first? It could be somebody influential said to you when you were a kid, you're not good enough. And so that stuck. And so your conversation with yourself around your ability seemed to reinforce this. And so then your experience reinforced it also. And so you stayed there, and it just got worse and worse, right? Now, how does that influence your experience? Well, if you're convinced that you haven't got the skills and ability and knowledge and so forth to do something, well, you're not going to try. You're less likely to try. In fact, you're going to cower away from trying new things. On the one hand, and you might remember this from what we were talking about, was it yesterday or the day before, on personality, and we were talking about openness to experience, you know? So if we're somewhat introverted, right, at the other end of the scale on extroversion, and we're not very open to experience in this particular space, well, then we're not going to try things. And you'll find that people who are low on openness, that are quite introverted, or maybe have a mental conversation that's not supportive of them being more open. Do you see where I'm going? So your mental conversation matters. How you talk to yourself matters. And you can begin to turn this around. You can begin to turn this around by finding opportunities to be your own critique, to critique your own initial thoughts. So to challenge the initial negative thoughts around a particular subject. This is something I work with clients on regularly. So they would often come to the table or come to the room with a problem. And so the problem would be reflected in how they talk to themselves and what they believe about themselves and what they believe about their relationship and so on. And so we often find ourselves in conversation with ourselves when there's nobody around. And one, at least, step we can take in reversing this overly negative mental conversation is to challenge that negative thought. So, for example, I think that I'm not good enough. I shouldn't be here. I'm a bit of a blagger. I'm going to be found out. Now, if you leave it there, forget about it. That's it. You're stuck. So I would ask you to challenge that by saying, hang on a second. I'm fit. I'm strong. I've got ability. Okay, I'm not the best in the room. I'm not the best on the field in this squad, but I'm doing my best. And I know I have the capacity to learn and grow. And look at this situation. I'm currently with players that are better than me. So I have an opportunity to learn from them. So you know what? Even though I feel a little bit uneasy here or a little bit out of place, I know that I can grow and develop, and I'm going to take advantage of this because who knows where it could take me. And then you begin to imagine the future and create a new scenario for yourself. So it takes work, it takes effort. And if you're not willing to put in the effort, if you're not willing to notice, first of all, how you're talking to yourself, and then resolve to perhaps look for alternatives or look for reasons why that's not true, well, then you're stuck. So that's my advice to you, very simple terms. Okay, this is only a short video, but this is an approach that therapists will take in cognitive behavioral therapy to begin to reframe how we see the situation, to entertain the possibility that things could be different. Tomorrow hasn't happened yet. This is something that I suggest to clients all the time. Tomorrow hasn't happened yet. It never comes. So give it a chance to give you something different, to show you something new. If we can continue to reinforce the negative experiences of our lives, we're never going to have an opportunity to experience something different. Does that make sense? Sometimes the nice things squeeze their way in, but if we're predominantly focused on past life experiences and we project that into the future, we're not really giving ourselves a chance. So your inner mental conversation matters. Going 12 minutes now. What can you do? I already mentioned one thing that you can do to reverse an overly negative mental conversation. Something else you can do is for a week, take a diary, something like this here. Right, I have a good few of these, keep them on the go, probably too many. Use a pen and a page and take a note, record those negative conversations that you have with yourself. Because if you haven't noticed this before, if you haven't managed to separate yourself from the negative thought that goes on, well, you'll believe that it's you and you won't even question whether it's right, wrong, or good or bad. You believe that it's accurate. And so I would challenge you to do that as a step one. Take a notebook and a pen, and for a week at night before you go to bed, write down and record the instances where you found yourself being overly negative with yourself. And as you walk through your day, as an add-on, as you walk through your day and you go about your work and your sport or whatever it is you're doing, notice it. Recognize, hang on a second. It really is a powerful thing to catch yourself in the act and to just ask yourself to stop and say, hold on a minute. Is this necessarily true? Am I right? What's the alternative here? What could be also true? Does it have to be a disaster? Right? And that's a good place to start. Like I said, cognitive behavioral therapies teach this skill. This is a skill, being able to catch yourself in the act. Now, it's also important to say you must be wary of being overly optimistic, because an enhanced degree of optimism for the future can sometimes blind us to the potential pitfalls because they're there. And if we ignore the signs, it's likely, it may be likely, that we'll fall into one of those holes. So we've got to have our heads tuned in, our awareness out there, and be able to recognize the signs when they arise that maybe things aren't as great as we think they are. Okay, so toxic positivity, I think, is referred to popular narratives online. So be wary of over optimism. Be optimistic for sure. Recognize that tomorrow can be better than today and that you can always learn and grow and develop, right? Work on your growth oriented mindset, on developing that mindset. But also, don't ignore the signs that are present right now in your awareness. If the road is busy, you're not going to step out into the traffic, right? You're going to wait for the green man and then you're going to cross. But even when the green man comes up, you're going to look left and right, okay? Because you don't know who's going to break the lights. It's just being clued in, tuned in, turned on, aware, sharp, and being optimistic for yourself about tomorrow. It really is a powerful skill to develop. We're going to talk more about inner conversation and more specifically self talk. Tomorrow, day 15, that brings us to halfway. I'm going to talk about, get more specific around self talk and using self talk as cues for performance, right? And then the following day, going to talk about, what have I got on the list here? Going to talk about a little bit more about challenging those negative thoughts. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks for listening. This has been day 14 of 30 Days of Mental Skills. You can catch this material on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can get it on YouTube and Substack. On Substack, there's loads of notes and links and so forth that you can access. And this is a lead into a course I'm building titled Essential Mental Skills. If you want to lead a meaningful, purposeful, successful life for yourself or sporting career or whatever happens to be, develop these essential mental skills. There's 9 of them. And you'll see the results shown in your output. All right, I'm Larry Maguire. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.